So, hi, everybody. Welcome to our bi-weekly virtual plant clinic with Merrifield Garden Center. For those of you who are regular attendees, I'm not Sally. My name is Daniel Capley. I'm usually one of the ones behind the camera on the end where David is right now. But Sally wasn't able to be here today, so she asked me to fill in. So I'm happy to be here. So today we have David Yost doing our plant clinic, as he has done for the past for the past couple of years now. Just a couple things for those people who have not been with us before. This is a Zoom webinar, not a Zoom meeting, so we can't see you or hear you, but you are going to be able to ask questions via the Q&A tab that's at the bottom of your screen, or the chat function. I'll be monitoring both of those spaces there. And at certain times during the presentation, David will be answering those questions. So whenever you think of a question, please feel free to write it in, and we'll try to get as many questions answered as possible. I think that's about it for me right now. So, David, I'm going to send it over to you.
All right. Well, Daniel, thanks for filling in for Sally today. Uh, this has really just been a glorious week, hasn't it? I mean, we've had warm temperatures, sunshine, blue skies, puffy white clouds. Really, really a great time to be out working in the garden. And we've seen that here at the garden center. It's great to see all of you coming in here as well. So, kind of thinking about what I want to talk about this afternoon, I said, well, everything is coming into bloom, everything's exploding, and there's color every place. So that's kind of it. I've got sort of wide-ranging topics where I'm just talking about flowers, what's in bloom, what's looking really nice, featuring a few plants that I think have a good place in your garden or certainly should be considered, and a few little pointers and tips along the way of how to care for them. But as Daniel mentioned, please send your questions in. I've got kind of just these wide-ranging topics and plenty of time built in for any of your questions. So thanks for joining us this afternoon. And let me say, before I really jump into the topic, there were a couple things in my mind. One is I just want to discuss a couple, I think, what are important dates or sometimes confusing dates. One of those is what's today, the 18th, April 18th. So where I'm sitting here at our Fair Oaks store location and right about the middle of Fairfax County, our average frost date is April 20. So what that means is as of April 20, our chances of frost are reduced to 50-50 chance. So even though it's warm, it's sunny, and it's great seeing everybody, getting started on their planting, I'm trying to emphasize, uh, go for it. The conditions are fantastic. Enjoy yourself. But right now, historically speaking, we're sitting about 50-50 chance that we could still have a frost. What we call our frost-free date, where I can really guarantee you, okay, there's 0% risk of frost. That may not be until May 20. So it's a great time for planting. Things are blooming, but if you're putting tender stuff out there, just remember that, hey, over the next couple of weeks, we're going to keep an eye on the forecast. I don't expect any kind of frost or cold weather coming because we seem to be moving ahead on that. But keep that in the back of your mind, right? A lot of people are putting tomatoes out there, and I'm, not trying to stop you from doing that. I'm just putting that little caution, saying, hey, go for it, enjoy yourself. Let's get started in the gardening, but at the same time, let's keep an eye on the forecast. And should you see temperatures dropping down, anything really below 36 degrees, which again is unlikely, but if it should happen, you might want to have some frost cloth handy, or even if your plants are in pots, be ready to bring them in, that kind of deal. But having said that, I'm like everybody else. I'm out planting. I was planting last night, and I'm talking about tender stuff. If you're talking about perennials, trees, shrubs, that kind of stuff, go for it. So I did want to talk to you about flowers and flowering today. And what sort of stimulated this is because this has been what's coming into us at the plant clinic is mostly questions. And this might seem a little weird, but people bringing weeds into the plant clinic from their lawns. And what happens is you don't think of your lawn as a blooming plant. what we want to grow, the reason we're growing our lawn is because we were growing it for the vegetative stage of its growth. We're growing it for the thick, dense carpet of green foliage that's there. But our cool season grasses, uh, their life cycle is such that they actually, in the fall of the year, like many plants, they produced a little flower bud. You couldn't see it because it's down the crown of the plant. They go through the winter, and now as spring is here and the days are longer, the temperatures are warmer, this is when the plant moves from being in its vegetative state into its reproductive or flowering state. That's why your lawn's growing, and it has to be mowed like every 4 or 5 or 6 days, because it's growing so vigorously, because what it's trying to do is it's trying to produce a flower stalk. Now, the other thing that happens is we think of our grasses, our lawns, just as a uniform, consistent, all one type of grass. But the reality is, most of us have a mixture of different grasses growing in there. And when they're in this vegetative state, when they're all just kind of behaving themselves and just growing leaves, the foliage is so similar in color and texture and stuff, we don't really notice. It all blends together. But at this time of year, as the flowering sequence begins, that's when suddenly some of it starts to grow faster or slower than others. You start to see texture, you see these kind of weird patches showing up. And a lot of people are coming in trying to find out, hey, what is this? What is this stuff growing in my lawn? So to try to illustrate this, I pulled up a couple clumps of grass out around the nursery. So this is bluegrass right here, right? So if you were not mowing it, this is what it would look like, right? So bluegrass, when we're mowing it, of course, like I say, we're keeping it down to height of about 3 inches, and all you see is the nice green foliage and vegetation. But at this time of year, it starts sending these big, vigorous flowering stems up like this. And you're thinking, what is this stuff? What is this growing in my lawn? Uh, it wasn't there last year. I mean, I've heard all of these kind of explanations. And when I try to explain, this is just the biology of the plant. This is what it does. It grows, and you get what we call these culms, C-U-L-M-S, these thick flowering stems that shoot up. So then it's kind of unsightly that's in there. Bluegrasses are in their flowering phase now. Some of them started blooming even as early as a month ago, but everything again is a little early this year, but they are flowering now. And about within another week, I'm going to say, you're going to see this happen with your tall fescue grass, right? So this is tall fescue. And again, what you can tell here is, again, these thick, coarse stems, they're shooting big upright like that. There's a little flower forming here. Eventually, we call it's in the boot. I don't know where these names come from, but eventually within the next week or so, you're going to start to see flower heads coming out of there, right? So if you see that going on, it's no reason to panic. It just means you have a mix of different grasses. They're going in their flowering sequence. It's kind of noticeable, it's kind of annoying, and sometimes you don't like it, but that's just the way it is. That's how grasses live and grow. You'll know because right now, right, they're getting covered with the pollen from the oak trees because the oak trees are blooming, releasing pollen everywhere. Then the grasses are going to start doing this because these again are wind pollinated. So if you have any kind of allergies, you will know when all this is going on. Anyway, I think all this stuff's kind of interesting. I like to look at it when I'm sitting in traffic. I'm looking at the median strip, identifying the grasses and looking at the bloom stalks on them and that kind of thing. Got to do something to keep yourself entertained, right? So some of these become weedy grasses. If I'm trying to grow a mix of tall fescue and Kentucky bluegrass, which is what most of us grow, we actually encounter about 4 different species of bluegrass. And so what people are bringing into us this is what's called annual bluegrass, Poa annua. And it's a little small tufted grass with this limey green leaf on it. And you'll see that these flower heads develop very close to the ground and is small and stunted. If you just let it grow, it might get 2-3 inches tall. But even if you're mow it like on a golf course where they're even mowing it 1/2 inch heights and stuff, it will still grow and flower in those conditions. It is an annual. It dies out in the summertime, and then we can put some controls down in the fall. This is Poa trivialis, or rough stalk bluegrass. And it gets its name because, again, now see all these flowering stems. It's in full peak bloom right now, has been for the past month. So this time of year, it looks really stemmy. Unfortunately, if you're running into this, there's really not much you can do about it. You either have to kill these parts of your lawn or dig them up and then go back and replant them. There's no selective weed control for that. But anyway, so that's it. That was my first flower that I wanted to feature. Not what you were expecting or thinking of, but I always like to say, hey, the little bit of plant biology and that lawns are flowering plants. So we're gonna switch gears, get to some pretty stuff. Oh boy, or the red buds, absolutely glorious right now. Again, so the red bud, it's one of our native trees, grows throughout the United States. I'm going to say up and down the East Coast into the Northeast, even out to the Midwest. This is what would be referred to as an understory tree. So its ideal, perfect habitat is where sort of at the edge of the woods. If you put a red bud into deep shade under the canopy of tall oak trees, they grow, but they're thin, they're spindly, they don't bloom as prolifically. You take that same tree and you move it out to where it's getting at least half a day of sun or so, and then we start to get really nice density, good form in there, and this nice kind of prolific flowering that's on there. So red bud, of course, questions always come up. You know, it's not really red, it's kind of magenta pink. That's true. It's at its peak bloom right now today. It often starts right around the first part of April, but we were warm, then we were cold. That was kind of nice, slowed things down for us. And it gets recognized because these little pink flowers cluster all along the stem. So it has these twigs at this sort of zigzag shape. You get to see the blooms first, highlights the form of the plant even before the leaves begin to grow out. It is a member of the pea family. So if you were to look at the individual flowers on there, it looks just like a pea, but they're small and they're actually edible. So they don't have a lot of flavor, but if you want to sprinkle a few in your salad and the tree is like in a safe environment where it hasn't been exposed to anything, that can also be a little thing that adds some fun to it. Also, excellent, excellent landscape trees because they don't get real big. A lot of times in our suburban urban landscapes, we really need plants that are going to stay a little bit smaller in stature. So here we're talking about maybe 20 feet tall, 20 feet wide. Over the next 30, 40 years or so, eventually they can get a bit larger. A lot of times people like to bring up this is not a long-lived tree, but to me, if you get 40 years of good beauty out of the tree, you got nothing to complain about, and that's long-lived for most of us. So there have been a lot of different varieties on this tree developed because it has so many good qualities. Right next to it, you'll see a variety. It's called Oklahoma. Um, and what's different about this one is you can see the density and the color of the flowers that are in there. I just learned as I was getting prepared for this that this is the state tree of Oklahoma. So the redbud is Oklahoma's state tree. So they kind of named this particular variety Oklahoma to give you that, I don't know what color you want to call that, kind of that sort of deeper purplish pink type color in there, a little bit glossier leaf. This is a naturally occurring variety. So what that means is like if you've got millions of red buds out there, and literally we do, hey, every once in a while, sort of a natural variant occurs, and that variant has this darker coloration, a little bit glossier leaf. So that was then cultivated and made the state tree of Oklahoma. The thing that you really see on these red buds when you come into the nursery and start looking at them, there's been a huge amount of development, proliferation in their leaf color as well. So we have red buds that have sort of just the native ones that have a kind of pink coloration. We've got some that go closer to a red, like Appalachian red. We've got some that kind of purplish pink that we were looking at in Oklahoma. So we've got white ones. So there's varieties in flower color. But what's really fun to play with on this is now we have varieties that have different leaf color in it. So Rising Sun is a very popular variety, and it looks like our native red bud with kind of those light pink flowers when it's in its bloom. As soon as it's done flowering, it comes out with these almost lemon yellow leaves on it. And you'll watch they go through a sequence. When there's a real little leaf, it comes out as little tinges of like this apricot coloration. As that leaf expands and matures, it starts taking on this nice kind of lemon yellow color. By the time we get into mid or late summer, it is gone to more of a light green coloration. So this is just one more way that you can add levels of interest into your landscape, and red buds are a great plant to play around with and do that with. So my next little tree that we have to talk about has to be our native flowering dogwood, Cornus florida, the state tree of Virginia. If I'm going to lead off the state tree of Oklahoma, we're going to follow up with the state tree of Virginia. Um, these are overlapping in their bloom season. So the red buds kind of start out first, and then within usually a week or so, when the red buds are coming on, then our dogwoods start to come in, and you can find both red buds and dogwoods overlapping at the same time. Of course, this is what makes just one of the things that makes spring so wonderful here where we get to live in this nice transition area where we get the diversity of flowers, and spring is so gorgeous. So our native dogwood here, again, it lives in a very similar habitat environment the red bud does, similar in stature. It likes that edge habitat. So dogwoods will grow in full sun and they will grow in full shade. They have to adapt to the environments there. But if I put that plant in full shade, again, it's thin, it's sparse, I don't get that many flowers. If I put it in full sun, the heat and the dryness stress it out. I get tip burn, and it kind of slows its growth. Where they do their very, very best is somewhere between those extremes, where I might get half a day of sun and then I get a little bit of shelter from that real intense afternoon conditions. And that's where they can look their absolute best and really nice and full, like you see here. Uh, you probably know this, but just it will help us as we look at some of our other species that are out there. This is the actual flower. If you look inside, this is a collection of little individual flowers. So if you look at that, typically you're going to find them that have a little flower that has about 4 petals in there. You can see where it produces the pollen and everything, and that takes place in the middle. This outer ring of are actually, these are modified leaves. These are not petals, but these are leaves that evolved over time to sort of fulfill the function of petals. And this is the big showy part. This is sort of what we go for when we're planting them. And on our native dogwood, because you'll see the contrast now, I want to point out what I call this little dimple at the end of it. So I've got my 4 bracts on there and tend to have this little indentation, that little dimple that's in there. Again, wonderful native tree for our landscapes, nice size, beautiful form, beautiful flowers. Gives us berries to help support wildlife, as we go into the late summer. And then the fall color on this can be really beautiful. So I love seeing people plant dogwoods because we're getting everything, where hey, I got flowers, I got fruit, the ecological value that goes to it, the beauty that goes into it. But the other side is they get a few more pest issues than some other trees. Our native dogwood, they get, leaf spot on them, they get some mildew. If the plant is stressed, then we start to see problems with borers on it. But every time I have found dogwood borers, that's in a plant that's out in really hot, stressful, sunny conditions. So just siting them in the right environment and protecting them from injuries, a couple little easy steps like that, they can be a very long-lived, enjoyable plant in your landscape. So this is just the natural form, the white flowering one. So then we get into where I talk about cultivars. Again, this is the same species. It's Cornus florida. It's the same as any other dogwood that's growing in the forest. But what we say when I say cultivar, there's been this variation. So one suddenly develops this really nice pink and white coloration in the bloom. And we say, wow, that is pretty spectacular. And then we take that one and start cloning it. That's where, again, the cultivar, cultivated variety. So this one, again, you see the same tree, same flowering habitat, but Cherokee Brave is just one of the many, many varieties out there. And it's selected because you get this kind of deep, kind of rosy pink coloration, the bracts, that white kind of center and that gradient of color. And the colors also change over time. We had a customer, oh, it might have been 10 days ago or something, complaining that their dogwood had brown flowers. There was something wrong with it. Like, no, those are the little bracts that as they begin to emerge, and they're very, very immature. You might see a little bit of brown color as they open up. You get this is really nice rosy pink. As it finishes and it matures, it gets almost this sort of light blush of pink color into it. So that's nothing that's wrong with the plant. That's just something to enjoy as we start to see it over time. But yeah, these were taken. I guess I was out walking around. I think it was on Sunday or Monday, and just so beautiful. I said, man, we got to feature dogwoods and put them on the air. So that's our native dogwood that's out there. This is the Kusa dogwood. This is kind of its Asian cousin. They bloom later in the season. So if our native dogwoods are flowering now, Kusa dogwood, they're typically blooming for us in late May, maybe even the first part of June. It can fulfill some of the same needs of our native dogwood in the landscape, meaning it's a slightly different form. It tends to have this little bit upright vase form where it will branch closer to the ground, though it can be trained onto a single stem. These dogwoods, they're more pest resistant, so things like we don't have any issues with the mildew, the leaf spot, or the borers that are in there. Like I said, they bloom a little bit later. They're a bit more tolerant of dry, sunny conditions. So if it's something where the durability is more important, if I'm putting that in a site where I know it's not going to get much attention or it's a harsher environment, this might be one to suit your needs. It produces a berry, but that berry is about almost the size of a grape. So some people don't like the tree because then they get these sort of grape-sized berries falling to the ground. That, I'm going to tell you, my experience has never really been an issue because the squirrels eat them, some of the larger birds eat them. The berries, they're edible by people, but they just, to me, they don't taste good. But if you have a taste for them, you can use that. So that again is our Kusa dogwood. And there's many varieties here. There's the white flowered ones that you see here. There's pink flowered ones. There's some that have variegated leaves. So again, think of these as not a tree I'm showing you, but these are groups of spring blooming trees that you might want to consider including. Moving right along. So again, these are hybrids. These are where these were developed up at Rutgers University, where what happened is the plant breeders, they wanted a dogwood that would have better insect and disease resistance. So they were taking our native dogwood and our Asian dogwood and hybridizing them together. And so you can see some of the qualities of both parents in this tree. Their bloom time is sort of intermediate. So if I have our native dogwoods flowering now, our Kusa dogwoods flowering for me in late May, these are flowering right about the first part of May or late April, right at the same time the leaves are growing out. So the leaves and the flowers come out together. There's a whole series of them that are collectively called the stellar series. So they'll have things like, Venus, stellar pink, names like that go with it. I put this in a little bit just to show you because I'm just kind of playing games with you on these plant names. But what they do, what all this kind of means is it tells us a lot. The X tells me that this is a hybrid, right? So if I have Cornus Florida, our native dogwood, Cornus Kusa, our hybrid dogwood, or I mean our Asian dogwood, X means they've been hybridized, and then they are given a name like this when they're under development and a patent number. So this means nothing to anybody unless you happen to be holding the patent. You certainly can't go shopping with it. So they might give it a name. I can't remember this one. I think they called it, Rutland or Rutdan, Ruttan. They gave them all because they came out of Rutgers University. Then you actually get to the point where somebody with a little marketing savvy comes in and say, hey, let's name them Constellation, Venus, Milky Way, the Stellar Series. So these names, I always intrigue because it does tell a story. But these are rock solid, sturdy, resistant, easy care trees. They do not produce the berry, and to me, their fall color is not as brilliant as it is on either of the parents. But it's always nice to have a diversity of plants, and it might be something that just fits in your landscape. I also think this picture I took in Arlington, I just kind of forewarn you, I'm a I'm out whenever I'm out and about, I see something that stops me, I pull over, take a picture, say, wow, that's just a nice example of what this tree could look like, it should look like. One last one, and then I'm gonna get into some shrubs pretty quick, is the fringe tree, Chianathus virginicus. So just it says there again, virginicus. It's native and indigenous to here in Virginia. Sometimes it's called old man's beard or gray beard because this is when it flowers, which is typically towards May. They have not bloomed yet, but they get these really interesting sort of tassels that hang down, very kind of light, airy look to it. They have a nice fragrance to it. Again, this tends to be a multi-stem tree, but you can train them into a single stem. About the same sort of height and size range as like the dogwoods and redbuds are. I just bought one of these last week. I'm planting it in my backyard, maybe this coming weekend. I went for a single stemmed one because I wanted to be able to underplant on it. Um, and I chose it because I wanted the smaller size. I'm also putting an area that has less than ideal drainage, and this is a tree that will tolerate different kind of soils and drainage conditions, and really nice addition to any landscape. They do have separate male and female ones, so if you're lucky enough, if you get the female, that produces a berry that the birds will eat, but we hardly ever know if it's a boy or a girl, and they're both beautiful. So, oh, I'm not done with trees yet. Oh boy, my time's going quick. But the Chinese fringe tree, again, so I thought I'm showing you the native trees. I'm kind of showing their Asian relatives are there. The Chinese fringe tree, you can see just it's a shorter, denser flower, kind of a little bit poofier. I mean, if that's a word, in color. Again, they seem to be a little more accepting of harsh environments. So it's a hotter, sunnier environment. You might look at this, the Chianathus retusus, the Chinese fringe tree. It also gets a peeling, exfoliating bark as it matures, almost like almost looks a little bit like an oak leaf hydrangea as they get older. So that gives it another measure of interest as well. So that's a whole handful of spring blooming trees that we can look at. And I'm going to just say a couple things about azaleas because, face it, here we are in the DC metro area, and it's dogwoods and azaleas, right? That's the classic combination because we have the same bloom times. They're just great to combine with. They grow in similar environments. So what's just not to love about them? So these are sort of just traditional azaleas, some large specimens we have growing on the property. I don't know exactly which varieties they are, but I think there's probably over 2,000 or more, 2,500 or more different varieties of azaleas out there because they're so easy to hybridize and propagate. And they just get these explosion, this profusion of blooms that are out there. I just brought in a couple behind me. You can see sort of just out of our selection is there. This one they call, I think this is a Gerard Red. The Gerard hybrids I tend to like because they are actually selected for having also nice foliage, a little bit better leaf retention that's in there. Can't remember, Tradition, just a nice pink color that's out there. And these also stay a little smaller, more compact than what you see in your picture. So there's just a ridiculous number of azaleas to choose from. You kind of pick the size, the color. You can also make some choices regarding the bloom time. So this is a little low, almost ground cover type, or sometimes is Satsuki type variety of azaleas. These I planted them. This is in my front yard and planted, I'm going to say about 7 years ago, plus or minus. They are now about 2 feet tall, 2 feet wide, maybe 3 feet wide, but they are very close and low to the ground. I put the dates in here because this was last June. So we think of azaleas as flowering for us in April, which is true for many, but we can get some that will even flower into June. So here you see them in the landscape, that little flush of pink. I was able to catch both the Kousa dogwood in here, the oak leaf hydrangea, as well as these Chinzan azaleas. So I thought that's kind of a cool little combination. This is Sun King Aurelia brightening up the landscape as well. And this is without nobody actually gets any direct sun. You know, you see that bright dappled light, nice environment for it. Another thing on azaleas, we are now real popular. I hear people talk about twice blooming or flowering, you know, repeat blooming. Not quite the true story. What happens on these, you can see this is picture you can see as it says on May 5th. So all these flower buds, let's say 75% of them might open for me in April, May, and then the remainder of those flowers start open for me kind of October, November. So it's kind of a sequence of bloom where I get some flowers for me in early spring, and then I also get some flowers for me in the fall, because that's one of the things people didn't like about azaleas, because they have like a 2-week bloom season, then they're done. So this extends the flower season again, a bunch of different colors on there. I'm going to stop with this. I've got a short little video that we want to show you. It will give you a few pointers on how to care for them, and then we'll take some question break after that.
Thank you, David. I'm going to upload that or set up that video right now.
Hi, I'm here to share some tips with you on how to keep your azaleas and rhododendrons looking terrific. As soon as they finish blooming, this is the ideal time to go in and prune and fertilize them. But before we start cutting, we need to set some goals and objectives of why we are pruning them. So this plant that we're looking at today is in good health, but it's gotten a little bit overgrown and it's a little bit misshapen. So I'm going to go in and use a technique that I call selective thinning. By reaching down inside the plant and taking selective branches out, it helps to retain the natural form and shape of the plant. I target my cuts to cut where that branch naturally divides or forks. That helps with the plant in the healing process from the pruning, as well as maintaining the natural shape. So when we've completed, you look at this and realize I've reduced the size by about 25%, but it still looks like an azalea. Now azaleas respond really well to pruning, and you can be as vigorous as you want. You can prune them back to almost any height or shape you need. But with rhododendrons, they're close relatives, I have to be a little more stingy with them. I don't like to cut back in the old growth. So I go in, deadhead it, pull off the old spent flower blooms just to make it look prettier, and then again do a little bit of selective thinning out the tips of the branch to maintain that density. Once we've completed our pruning, this is also the ideal time to fertilize them. I'm using Merrifield Flowering Plant Food, which will help to encourage good healthy growth, set flower buds later this summer, and reward us with gorgeous blooms next spring.
And we'll go here. And this is the year after the spring following the pruning. So I wanted to show you how that turned out. And you can see that by pruning them right after they flower, it allows the plant time to recover, produce flower buds. And again, that's that same azalea the following spring. So that went well. So let's see if we have any questions. We'll take a little break right here and see if we have any questions that have come in.
Yes, we have just a few. So if people have any questions, feel free to write them in. The first question is going to be, so this person says, can a small Kousa dogwood in mostly shade and not blooming be transplanted? Transplanted now in a sunny location? Is it too warm or is it still too cool to transplant?
Yeah. So I'm going to answer it this way and say, to me, the very best time to transplant it would be when it's dormant. So that would be, they're starting to break their dormancy. But I would say I'd love to be doing that more in December, January, February, or even November time period. Having said that, when you say small, that's a relative term, but if the tree is young and it has not been in the ground and you feel like you can get a decent root ball on it, then I would say let's just get to it as soon as we can, because it is starting to grow now. We're entering into the growing season. It's inevitable that you will be cutting roots in the transplanting process. So that's a little bit of a stressful thing. And then again, you would follow all the planting and watering instructions, just like it was a new tree. So if it's in good health, like I said, it's small, it's kind of young, I'm going to say you've got very good chance of success. If it's been well established, or it's a tree that's anything that's over, I'm going to say if it's more than 5 or 6 feet tall, I feel better if we could wait and do that during the winter months.
Wonderful. All right, next question is going to be, somebody has false garlic that is growing in their yard. Is there a benefit to the bees and other insects
Oh yeah,
having?
when it flowers, it does. Now I don't know that any animals are like really feeding on it, not that I'm aware of, because again, that's why anything in that family, that allium family, is very pungent, its taste, and it seems like most animals seem to avoid it. But when it does reach its flowering point, it does provide a food source, I know, for all kinds of pollinators. They're actually quite good. Uh, so that again, that's personal choice on getting out of there. Wild garlic, wild onions, it's really a hard to control weed. So if you decide you don't like it, you pretty much are left digging up the bulbs and everything. So the other is just to say, I'm just gonna let it be there, let's do its thing. And if you don't mow it or cut it back, it will eventually uh, develop flowers. Like many of us grow chives as an herb, so it gets a flower. Think of like chives, but the flower is going to be smaller, and I think they're either kind of a white to a light pink color.
All right, this might be a bit of a broader question with a long answer, but this person was hoping that you could review the proper way to decide if you need to water and how deep would you need to feel the soil to determine to water.
Yeah, so I a lot of times am really focusing on new plants because I'm in a retail environment, and I'd like to say watering a new plant is a totally different process than a well-established plant. So let me begin from that and say if you have a plant that, and when I say well-established, I mean it's got its full root system, it's had its normal growth rate. Trees, shrubs, most plants, their roots grow way out. If I have a tree that's say 20 feet tall, it might be sending roots 40, even 60 feet out wide. And they cover a big wide area, and that wide network of fibrous roots has ability to capture water and rainfall and moisture. And most of the time, nature around here, we tend to have 34, 33 inches of rain, and that's going to support most of the trees. What I would say, give you more specific guidelines, is if you're not certain, I would like to see the top 6 inches of the soil remain moist. So let's say I've hit a dry spell and it's been hot and it's been dry and there's no rain, and we're now going to our second or third week of it. You could literally take a hand trowel or a soil auger, check in several places under there, and let's go down and check the top 6 inches of the soil. If that top 6 inches of the soil feels moist, we're generally good. If you start to feel dryness in there, then I want to water. And if I water, I want to do a very long, slow water. You might want to let a sprinkler or soaker hose run under there for hours at a slow rate so it can actually infiltrate down and moisten that top 6 inches. Now that's on a mature established tree, and we rarely really hit those extended dry periods. If I've talked about a new tree, think about this big wide root system, but now I've cut, severed, or packed those roots into a little container. They can't get that rainfall and they can't get the water that's out there. They are totally dependent on you to water directly on that root ball. On smaller trees that might be, I'm saying 3, 5 gallon, even up to maybe a 1 inch caliper, we're going to ask that you check on that at least once a week. And check on it means, hey, I want to like dig down there again, 4 to 6 inches, feel it. It should feel like a nice wet sponge, not completely soaking wet and not completely dry. When it gets to that point, then I'm going to soak right on that root ball. So real general guidelines, because it depends on the exposure, the size, the plant, the age. But if I have a new plant, if I've just put a new shrub in, let's say 5 gallon shrub, and it's summertime, I'm probably watering that about once every 4 or 5 days directly on the root ball. But there's a lot of variabilities in there. Larger plants, larger root balls, we can go for a longer time between waterings, but for a longer duration to make sure it's saturated. So yeah, it's hard to explain all this, but it's not that complicated. We just want to make sure that we really soak that root ball, saturate it well, a deep watering, but not too frequently. Then you don't water it again until it just starts to feel slightly dry. What we don't want to do is daily watering or every other day. Shallow, frequent watering, we generally want to avoid. So yeah, long answer to a short question. And we do have great resources on our website also. I should direct you there.
Yeah, I figured that was going to be a longer answer for that one because that can be quite convoluted. Next question is, how late can you fertilize azaleas?
So I can fertilize azaleas even into June and July if I'm making sure that I keep them watered. A lot of times you'll hear people say, oh, don't fertilize in summer, don't fertilize in summer. What they really mean is you don't want to fertilize a drought stressed plant. So ideally we want to fertilize them if they're blooming for me in April. I want to be fertilizing them sort of right in May. But if I'm out of town or I miss that, I don't have trouble even fertilizing right up to the early part of July if we are also monitoring the watering on there.
Wonderful. Next question is it too late to plant gladiolus bulbs for blooms this year?
No, you're just now getting into that season. Gladiolas love the warm temperatures and the warmth and the sunshine we had this past week. You should be at prime time right now. You can plant them today, this week, and you will have blooms this summer.
Wonderful. Next question is, can you give any info about bottle brush trees? Like how big do they get? Do they do, where should they be planted? Full sun, full shade, and even if they do well here in Virginia.
Yes, so I'm blanking out the because there's a couple plants. There's a bottle brush plant that's a tropical plant, but I don't think we're talking about that. I think we're talking about the this type of chestnut of bottle brush. They do well in Virginia. They do very well in they would naturally grow in kind of a stream valley. So that would say, I don't want to put them in the hottest, driest location, but if I put them almost like we talked about with dogwoods and red buds and where the amelanchier grows and all those serviceberry. So that kind of half sun, half shade, dappled light, moist but well-drained conditions are ideal for it. They get big, they get quite large. So it's a big shrub. And when I say big over time, I've seen them that are probably, 15 foot tall and almost 15 feet wide, some really old specimens. They've got some gorgeous ones up at world famous garden up in Pennsylvania and stuff. But they do quite well as a beautiful plant. The tassels, the flowers can get to be this long. So a lot of people really enjoy that. I'm going to say this is just a little personal pet peeve. It's not like that whole spike kind of blooms at once. They sort of sequentially move up that spike. So you end up where you've got beautiful spikes. The flowers are open here, and then you got some brown ones hanging on there. So that's always a little bit of a detraction. But interesting foliage, relatively pest free. And if you've got kind of that woodland naturalized setting, they should do quite well for you. And I'm 99% sure we do have them in stock. It's a plant that we sell, even though it's not. I think what limits its popularity is really the size of it. We need some room for it to grow.
Okay. Well, we're at the 2:45
Just
mark.
remember the bottle brush buckeye, of course. Yeah. So I think of it the same environment that you put like a oak leaf hydrangea, but allow it more room.
Gotcha. Let's just go through a few more before we sign off for the day. Next person is um, wondering about flowering shrubs that will thrive in part shade but not grow larger than 3 by 3 feet.
So there's quite a few choices. One of the things that we get
Oh, and they live in zone 8, so they're not necessarily local here, but somewhat.
okay, so that probably even opens up more possibilities. I'd say one of the things I think that limits ourselves is a lot of times we have this desire, I'll put it like that, for evergreens. I love deciduous plants because I love the change of seasons and things that go like that. So Itea virginica, the Virginia sweet spire, there's a variety, it's called Little Henry, that's going to stay down again at that probably 3, maybe 4 foot height. We are just talking about the oak leaf hydrangeas. There's miniature or small varieties on that. Fothergilla, which is another amazing plant that's in flower right now. Again, it looks like a bottle brush. So sometimes people even call that the bottle brush, which is I realize that I don't know what the earlier custom, again, plant names are always weird, but that's in the hazel family, gives us amazing fall coloration, as well as really interesting flowers that are on there right now. But these do shed their leaves. There's even other hydrangeas, again, our native hydrangea that's in there. There's some of those that will stay in that height range. So yeah, there's just a big list. If you start going into evergreens where you live down in zone 8, probably things like the Indian hawthorn would work well for you, as well as, of course, the azaleas, that we were talking about.
Perfect. All right, for this, I think we'll cap this off on this last question, but I'm picking this one because you and I and Kelly were talking about it earlier, but somebody wants to know what that flowering plant to your right is.
This one?
Yep.
Yep, that's our native columbine. So columbine, it's just a wonderful perennial that's pretty easy and reliable to grow. So I think it does its very best in kind of, again, this sort of woodsy environment. If it's in a really extreme hot, dry environment, they'll go into something of a summer dormancy. Reason I brought it in with me is because I found this is, for me, our native one here, it's probably one of the best hummingbird plants I've ever put in my garden. So they have these long spurs on here where the nectar is there to attract them, and you get to watch the hummingbirds come on there. So again, I brought a couple of them in here because there's all different colors in here. This kind of red one, there's blue ones, but this native one that's kind of this red and yellow. Boy, if you like hummingbirds, put one in your garden.
Yeah, those are really interesting and beautiful. All right, well, thank you so much, David, for spending time with us today and doing another plant clinic. I think you're about to take a little break from the virtual plant clinics, correct?
That's right. What happens is, like I said, we just as everything's flowering, we get like crazy busy in the store. So I'm just have to devote more time to being here in the store. So come and see me. I'm not going anywhere. I'm actually working more than ever, but I'll just be here at the plant clinic.
Yeah, it is beautiful out there, folks. I highly recommend that you come see us the next few days or this weekend. And pretty soon in a couple weeks, we'll get back into the webinars and the virtual plant clinics. I think we have a few. Sally has the schedule, and you can also look up our schedule on our website. If you didn't get your questions answered today. I see that we do have a few others. I was trying to go just right down the line of who was able to of what David was able to answer. But if you didn't get your question answered, just send us an email. You can do that through our website in the contact us tab. I'll get the questions and I can get them to David directly. But until next time, folks, thank you guys so much, and we'll see you then. All right,
All right,
bye-bye.
we'll see you then. Bye-bye.